Well, check it out, y'all. We got what you need. We're all living in apartments, condos, vans. Well, dude, even you can have a studio in a box. Yes, we can help you with that right here at Blind Knowledge. We work on your budget, and we figure out your measurements. We'll get you the best sound for the best price. Let me know, 877-237-1143 or at blindknowledge.com. Yep.
Specters all around me, living in the dark, blazing the dark. One by one, pictures gather around me. Where those moonflowers used to lost no more. Specters gather around here, living in the dark, blazing the dark. Night by night, stare into the black where moonflowers used to grow.
Welcome, everybody, back to another amazing episode of Paranormal the New Normal. I'm your host, Jeremy, as always, here to try and make this world a little more normal. Is it going to happen tonight? As always, no. If anything, we might scare you a little tonight, but you know what? That's why you come here. That's part of the reason, at least. So let's just get down and enjoy it. And let me introduce my wonderful guest tonight. And this is the first rush, folks, so we're going to enjoy this one. My guest tonight is Zachary Strong. And he is an expert in many things. If you look at his website, he's an expert in many things. But what we're going to focus on tonight is his expertise in the Orthodox Judaism world and its relationship to the paranormal, which we never delved into that in the 200-something episodes of this show. So let's have some fun with it. And Zachary, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, thanks. It's a couple days before the big eclipse, and my city falls just within the zone of totality. So everyone's quite excited about that whole thing. I just did a video on some of the implications of it, but yeah, so it's a fun time. Like, paranormal is in the air in Hamilton, Ontario. So yeah, it's a good time.
Ah, a Canadian. Nice. Gotta love it. One of my co-hosts on my other show is from Canada. So, love Canadians. Well, love them and also love to poke fun at them once in a while, but that's okay. I'm sure they poke fun at Americans all the time, so I would pause them. So let's start off with the same question I ask everybody on this show. What sparked your interest in the paranormal?
Good question. So I grew up in like a Christian family. Like, my grandfather was a minister and so on. And a couple members of my family have reported paranormal type things, like seeing or sensing ghosts and things like that. So growing up, like, I had folkloric stories from the family about certain things. So it was always kind of in my consciousness. But I grew up, like, I came of age, I was in high school in the 2000s, and that was when new atheism was exploding. And so when I was coming of age, like, that kind of dominated. And then I went into engineering school and learned all about science, etc. And so that it kind of faded away. However, in 2016, I was tapped to work on a research project involving student development, and specifically accelerated development. And so as an engineer, I was asking certain kinds of research questions and falling down certain rabbit holes. One of those was developmental psychology. One of those was neuroscience. Another one was spirituality and wisdom, because those seemed related, especially when you have spiritual experiences and cascades of insight and so on. So after about 2 years of really heavy, powerful reading, I had a 2-day spiritual experience. So this was like late 2018. And then I started doing more research on religion and so on, and eventually came to the rainbow covenant that was given to Noah. So that falls under Orthodox Judaism. There's seven general commandments that break out into about 60 to 100. And then as a part of my journey into Orthodox Judaism was I had very specific, detailed questions about the relationship between science and history and Judaism. Like, for example, Exodus says, 10 plagues, such and such. And if you go on Wikipedia and you look at, the history of ancient Egypt, the Exodus does not seem to appear, right? So what's that about? And then same with Genesis. Like, the first chapter of Genesis, is very, difficult to comprehend. And Christians had no clear answers. And so I was going into the Jewish literature with a mind to, reconcile some of that stuff. And thankfully, for me personally, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants like Dr. Gerald Schroeder and Rabbi Alexander Houle, because they are more familiar with the Jewish literature, like the Talmudic literature and so on. And so they've been able to connect things from coming primarily from science and history and secularism, and starting to connect things from the other side. And so a lot of my work recently has to do with physics and what I call full system physics, which is anyone who's spiritual or believes in spiritual worlds or anything, like, generally speaking, I think they're on board with the idea that thinking about our universe and only our universe as a closed system is incorrect and incomplete. And there's generally, there's stuff happening outside of the little bubble that is the edge of our universe, and so on. And when you start thinking about some of the transactions that are taking place, paranormal activity, near-death experience phenomena, and so on, all start to become understandable in the same way that we might understand a science. At least that's my perspective. So,
and I 100% agree with your perspective. I mean, I grew up Protestant, Christian, so I was reading Bibles in Sunday school as a kid with pictures of humans and dinosaurs in the same pictures, which, as I got older, I was like, wait a minute, something's not right here. Because, dinosaurs and humans never lived in the same time period as far as we know. There's been no proof of that. And, there's definitely no proof of that. I don't think it matters what faith you are. There's been no proof of that regardless, scientifically. And like you said, the whole ancient Egypt thing where, I never really thought about it too. I have thought about it, but not to the degree I'm sure you have. But, because you think about it, Egyptians in Exodus were enslaving the Jews, which Egypt was supposedly, according to the Bible, an established power by then. Where in ancient Egypt did this happen? Where in ancient Egypt is this in the history books? It's not. It's in the history books when you're in elementary school, because they're trying to blend, especially in America, because they're trying to blend Christianity and history together in a way. But actually, my third grade teacher actually I saw her at church once a year when four churches came together for a unified celebration. But so it just doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense when you think about science and actual history and the Bible. Not much of it makes sense. Yes, there was a great flood. That's the one thing that history and science and religion agree on, is there was a great flood at one point. Whether it was to wipe out giants or Nephilim, which possible. There's plenty of proof of giants out there. There's proof that giants still live among us. But the fact that that's the only thing that they really agree on, as far as I've seen, and it's just, I don't know. We can go into that in a little bit, I guess, but kind of interested more in I believe you call it the Rainbow Covenant, which, if I'm not mistaken, that's the Ark of the Covenant. That's where the Ten Commandments were kept in. And am I wrong?
Well, okay. So after the flood, how God said to Noah, Okay, now you go repopulate the earth, and the rainbow is the sign of the covenant that I have with you, that I'm not going to destroy everything this way again. So in the Jewish literature, and when I say Jewish literature, I mean
The
Talmud,
Torah.
yeah, like Torah, Talmud, Tanakh, like anything the sages wrote. Like if you like, I guess a good shorthand is if you are going onto a Jewish website and they refer to somebody as the somebody, like the Arizal, the Baal Shem Tov. Like if someone has a nickname attached with them, they're generally, you'd say a sage. So you can, like, their writings on sorry, which once I get lost on that, what was the thing that we were referring to? Because I'm going to come back to that.
Rainbow Covenant.
That Rainbow Covenant. So when you go into their literature and they kind of expound like verse by verse on, Genesis, Exodus, the Torah, and so on, what you get is a book basically like this, and this breaks down the laws that we have to follow in order for, things to be functional in the universe. Am I breaking up, or am I breaking up, or?
Yeah, you're freezing up a little bit as you move around. Even when you're not moving around, you're breaking up a little bit a second ago. But so yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know. Early religion is there's so much there that we don't know. I mean, my co-host from my other show, we always say that if the zombie apocalypse does happen, that we're going to go to the Vatican and finally find out what's in the basement, but because we want to read their library and find out the truth, but or at least as much of the truth as they have. I mean, I don't think even the Vatican has the full truth of everything. I really don't. I think
Yeah.
only extraterrestrials really know the truth. But because they've been watching. But I mean, as far as it goes, I mean, it's just, what was I just gonna say? I lost it 100%. I mean, Jesus, my mind is not in the right place today for this. Well, I mean, early religion. I mean, even if you look at like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where does that play in religion's timeline? That's what, like, the Epic of Gilgamesh, all the other ancient mythologies that we have. Where does all that play? Like, does that all come after like the whole Old Testament and kind of in the New Testament? Like, or which, I mean, it wouldn't make sense if it did, because the Epic of Gilgamesh is supposed to be BC, thousands of years BCE. I don't like to use BC, but BCE, thousands of years before BCE, before zero. I mean, it was supposed to be like one of the founding stories of Earth. So, which, I mean, that's where religion tries to confuse people. And it's hard to even discuss it because it's just like, where does it end? Where does it begin? Like, the timeline is just so askew that it's just not even easy to keep track of. It really isn't. I mean, you have to sit there and like really like look at it and be like, okay, this ends here, this ends here, this is the year for that. Oh, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. But the one thing I'm curious about, though, is so you were brought up Christian, but you converted to Judaism in your 20s, if I'm not mistaken, or teens?
Between age 30 and probably now is when I'm 34 now, so probably over the last 4 years.
Oh, okay, so you're younger. You're younger than me. Okay, when you said you were a kid in the 2000s, I was like, oh, so we're the same age basically. But so I mean, it's kind of, I mean, that kind of blew my mind because I figured you were brought up Jewish and that's why you got into it. But I mean, that kind of blows my mind. I mean, hopefully you're not like Bryan Cranston on Seinfeld and you'll convert Judaism only for the jokes.
Well, it's interesting. Like, for me, it's on the basis of the evidence. Like, I've got, like, on my YouTube channel, for example, I've got a video on Buddhism and how that doesn't line up with physics. And then there's some other issues with, their way of approaching the world. Then, I look into Christianity and there's question marks. But the thing is, when I look into Judaism, for example, Judaism says Exodus happened. Mainstream says Exodus didn't happen. But when you start looking into the mainstream, they just had a conference last year in Vienna talking about the dynastic chronology because they're still trying to figure it out. It's not as a done deal as they claim in the history books. And then you keep looking, the backbone for the Egyptian calendar is based on a certain celestial phenomena, but modern computational models of the night sky indicate that there's issues. And when you fix the issues with reference to things like the Karnak king list and the known civil war in the Second Dynasty, what you get is, instead of a linear timeline for 3,000 years, you get a parallel timeline where Upper and Lower Egypt were collaborative but separate entities for a period of time until the Thutmose dynasty, Thutmose III and Queen Hatshepsut, put it back together. And so that is, I would call this academic stunt work, but not in the sense that we're operating recklessly. It's in the sense that there's so many pieces of evidence strewn across hundreds of years, and you have to refer to computer models of the night sky. And it took me months to kind of put together, because when I read the Jewish claims, I was like, there's no way this can be the case, right? Because what happens is when you do this with the timeline, it becomes parallel. At the end of the 6th dynasty, massive calamity recorded. And then you cross the point over to see what's happening in Upper Egypt, you find plagues of boils on the Thutmose dynasty, and like Thutmose III, who reunited the whole thing, was not a firstborn son. And so you find, and there's a whole bunch of other pieces of evidence, like papyrus, like the slaves and the Ipuwer papyrus and so on. And so basically for me, my process of coming to the Noahide covenant and Orthodox Judaism was, every time I put Orthodox Judaism up against science and history, Orthodox Judaism prevails under a comprehensive evaluation of the evidence. And like, for example, something folks could do right now is they can go on pharaoh.se and look at the Karnak king list, and you will find some earlier dynasty pharaohs, some 11th dynasty pharaohs, some 6th dynasty pharaohs, and then some 12th dynasty pharaohs. And they're interpolating earlier and later dynasty pharaohs freely at a certain point in time in their own chronology. And the Egyptologists, most of whom are Eurocentric, right? They're just saying, oh yeah, the Egyptians, they were making mistakes about their own history. Ignore the fact that they were painstakingly engraving these things over the course of days, right? Like, it's not a typo, right? So it's just, there's a lot of evidence that the Orthodox Jews are correct on the Exodus thing. And then once you look at the, with Genesis and the Big Bang, once you look at some of the Jewish commentary on, like, and so listeners can go to Chabad.org and look at their Tanakh with Rashi's commentary. What you find is, the Bible talking about light being separated from darkness. That corresponds to the early universe cooling down and electrons becoming able to orbit around atoms without getting blasted away. And when electrons could orbit to atoms, photons were no longer intermixing with them. So NASA calls the early universe opaque. And so there's things like that line up. And, we don't have necessarily every little detail nailed down and explicated, but we have sufficient correspondences and sufficient, to even take the young universe claim. Like, we are in the year 5,784. That's my position. I play along with the secular viewpoint for business purposes, but my position is young Earth.
Which, makes sense. And Hello, Harley. Thank you for watching as always. And yes, I did get a haircut today. Thank you for noticing. I mean, it's hard not to notice when I used to have a mop in my head. But yeah, I mean, it's funny because when you say the no firstborn son thing, is that supposed to tie into when Moses had all the firstborn? God killed all the firstborn children that didn't put lamb blood over the door.
Yeah, because if, like, for example, like I try to like I guess you could say try to invalidate. Like I approach things with a skeptical mind. So for me, it's like if the Exodus, um, or like I guess a better way to phrase it is if Thutmose the Third was a firstborn son, then there must be issues for the Jewish claims, right? But that's not the case. If the Egyptians didn't themselves record certain things, like certain calamities, like do I have the Ipor Papyrus right here? I do. So people can get this on Amazon, Admonitions of an Egyptian Sage. And every tab in here I went through is a reference to a biblical event. So it talks, like, some of them are vague, right? But some of them, like, what I'll see if my potato camera can pick it up, but it says, "Forsooth,
Not
the
really.
river is blood." Yeah. So, but so it's I can at least say that evidence is in my hand. So we have these things that give the Jewish position a good foundation. And so for me, coming to the covenant was a matter of, being convinced by the evidence. And then since then, I've been able to basically do physics with the Psalms and, show that some of the things being referenced in the Psalms correspond to phenomena that we are starting to become familiar with, like black swan events. So once, and so for me, like, when I try to connect things, when I try to fit puzzle pieces together, they fit as they should, right? And yes, there are questions, but the questions end up having, credible answers. The answers are internally consistent with everything else, right? So it's not like, people ask, if you ask like a Christian minister, for example, like, why did God create Satan, right? Half the time they're going to short circuit. But if you ask me why God created Satan, basically it's kind of like an artificial intelligence that's there to challenge us. It's almost like gravity, the gravity in weightlifting.
But that's the thing, though. God didn't technically create Satan. He created an angel named Lucifer, supposedly. I mean, I'm agnostic, so I question all religions, like in max. I mean, there's something out there. That's why I'm agnostic, not atheist, because I know there's something out there, but I don't want to give a name to it till I have more proof. But so, I mean, and I am a huge fan of Milton's Paradise Lost, so that's kind of my jumping off point for Satan. And I mean, God didn't create Satan necessarily. His angels may have led to the creation of what we now know as Satan, but Lucifer was an angel, first and foremost, one of, according to literature, God's most favorite angels. And he fell because he didn't like God. He didn't like the way that God treated these humans, these insects, better than he treated his angels. So, I mean, at least according to literature. I mean, once again, this is all hypothesis. Like, we can never really know this unless we actually are told this by something greater than us. But so, I mean, God didn't technically create Satan. Satan just kind of came to be because he was thrown out of heaven for trying to get equal rights for angels. Which, I mean, and I really can't fault Lucifer for doing that if that's how it happened. Because if it happened the way it happened in Paradise Lost, I cannot fault him for doing that because he was just trying to see, like, why are these these insects being treated better than us when we are supposed to be the ones that are his favorite children? Like, it's just, I mean, I kind of get it. It's like a kid rebelling against a parent because they have another kid and they favor the new kid better than the old kid. So, I mean, it's just kind of the way it goes. I mean, like I always tell my kids, like it's like Angry Beavers. When the new beaver comes along, you're gonna get kicked out the dam because you're the old ones. Like it's
Mhm.
kind of the same kind of the same theory. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is all hypothesis, of course, folks, because I mean we can't know this stuff. We just can't. We're not meant to know it if it did happen, and that's a big if, because who knows if any of this is true? I mean, who knows if this is all just a story written by people back in the beginning of time? Like they wrote this story to try to make people listen to morals and make people listen to rules handed down by big a big god. Like who knows? Like I mean, I don't know. What do you think about all this? I don't want to get on my soapbox here and make a speech about it, but what do you think?
Well, I think like so I have a perspective that might surprise people, but so there's something called the Kuzari principle that has existed for hundreds of years that Jews have used to explain why Judaism is the true religion. And basically it comes down to a blockchain. So when you look at Exodus chapter 19, chapter 20, what you have is like millions of independent ledgers. Like if you imagine each human as a computer, you have millions of independent ledgers all sitting at the bottom of the mountain witnessing the same thing. And so the entire nation of people is able to interpret this within themselves. And then when you look at the structure of how Orthodox Jewish and specifically Orthodox Jewish, how they structure their laws and how they've kept the Torah across time, it functions similar to a blockchain. So when you have major sages coming together to make a ruling on something, majority rules, but you can have a minority opinion. And then in Jewish law, you can trace almost a fork where the minority opinion is followed by certain people in certain situations and so on. And so it's Judaism is actually like a blockchain. And if people ascribe to simulation theory, which I think I think it's close enough. That's a tangent, but simulation theory is close enough, except it's a developmental video game. It's once you factor in the neuroscience, our brains are always developing, our brains are always growing. And so any simulation that we must be in must be developmental. So it would make sense that a blockchain-like technology has been used to preserve a one true religion, because we are finding ourselves that is one of the best ways to verify things in a noisy situation, like the universe.
I mean, well, okay, and yes, if we are in a simulation created by the Anunnaki and the Palladians, then most likely it is a developmental one, because it's only been around for a couple thousand years according to our time. Their time, who the hell knows? But I mean, it's back to that whole I don't know. I mean, the Matrix simulation theory is always a popular thing in my conspiracies bracket, because it's what if it's true? What if it's true? Like it's mind blowing and mind expanding at the same time. But what if it's true? I mean, well, we are just all NPCs in some extraterrestrial's game. Like, what if that's the case? Like,
Well,
what's the point of us? What's the point then?
That's the cool thing about Judaism for me, is because a lot of these ideas can be connected back to what we would know as Kabbalah. Like, for example, the Jewish metaphysics, if I had to sum it up, you have this infinite light. The infinite light wants to share itself, but first it needs to create space for other, because it is all there is. So you have a series of simsum, which is Hebrew for contractions, and you basically get a series of lampshades around the infinite light, which are the spiritual worlds, and it creates a concealment, which is our world. And so the reason that the concealment happens is because if like for example, like let's say someone were to walk in your door right now and give you a Nobel Peace Prize or a Nobel Prize in physics, right? You'd be like, okay, this is cool, but I don't deserve this. This feels weird. And so heaven kind of works the same way. And what you need is an opportunity to make free will decisions and earn heaven yourself so you can be satisfied. And so the key in Judaism and the reason for the concealment, the reason for free will, the reason for evil and suffering is to give us a world where we can make free will decisions, earn merits for ourselves, and then go to heaven and genuinely enjoy what we've earned. And so, you know, the way that this is set up from the Kabbalistic standpoint is the Aleph Bet. The Aleph Bet provides the source code. So we have kind of a source code. Angels are kind of like computer programs. Satan in the Jewish metaphysic is kind of like an AI. And yeah, so that like a lot of the technological metaphors kind of fit. Like, for example, I personally, as a gamer, I enjoy Demon the Fallen from World of Darkness. Like, I enjoy the vibe, like that whole thing, which I think is.
I never heard of that actually.
Oh yeah, World of Darkness. Like,
I'm a gamer. I used to be a gamer like more in my like a couple years ago, but I never heard of that game.
Okay, yeah. So World of Darkness, like people might have heard Vampire the Masquerade. I've
heard of that. I've heard of that. Yeah.
I played it for years. Was at like a conference in Berlin for it. Met the founder. Like it's cool. Like that whole scene is cool. And they also have a game called Demon the Fallen, which is basically you're a rebellious angel dropped into a body and so on. So I as a gamer, I enjoy that vibe. But they have a New World of Darkness sequel, which is more angels as programs, and you know, you have like more technological type things. And that is kind of, and also when you look, and this is the thing, when you look at near-death experience testimonials, you should expect near-death testimonials to have similar elements. And they do. They talk about energy fields and so on. And a lot of it is technological or quasi-technological. So a lot of things are kind of converging on, we are in this simulation-like thing where time and space exist as emergent properties. It gives us a forum for free will and action. And that's and we are kind of like video game characters. Like when you factor in reincarnations, you can think of yourself as having a character class that gets spawned into different lifetimes. And so it becomes very easy to talk about this in terms of video game shorthand.
Well, okay. You never said though. What does the Jewish faith think of Lucifer? Like, what do they like? Do they just classify him as, oh, he was created to bounce out the world, or they look him as like the prodigal son?
Well, so it's the Jewish view of Satan is very interesting. So if you look at Job chapter 1, you'll find that Satan is in the court of heaven talking back and forth with God. God's giving Satan recommendation like, oh yeah, go pick on this Job guy, right? There's no one like him in the world. Go give him a hard time, right? So it's like, what is recommendation back and forth? And the way aside from attacking our internet connection, the way that Satan works is you can think of him like an artificial intelligence. So he is the undercover cop, and he is the thing that tempts you to sin and is allowed to tempt you to sin, because that is the challenge that gives you the opportunity to triumph, right? So Satan is the thing that challenges you. And then at the same time, he is also the prosecutor. And so that's when you see Satan in the court of heaven in the book of Job, saying to God certain things. So Satan is actually the undercover cop and the district attorney. And so he tempts you to sin, collects evidence, takes it up to the court of heaven, and then uses that to cause trouble. And so if you think of Satan as this artificial intelligence that is active everywhere all the time, just trying to make everything worse, right? That's kind of close to the Jewish view. However, part of the Jewish view is also the end time stuff. And basically at some point, Satan is going to be turned off. He's going to be retired, I guess you could say. And then we're going to enter a utopia type situation. So Satan is basically created for a purpose to tempt people and give us opportunities to improve and rectify ourselves. And at some point will no longer be active. So,
which, I mean, that theory right there is mind blowing because, I mean, Christianity, well, like, Satan doesn't become inactive ever. Like, he is eventually going to be starting the apocalypse, basically, because he's going to start the war between him and Jesus. Which, I mean, I know Jewish people don't believe in the New Testament, so, I mean, that's a whole nother thing. Like, Revelation doesn't happen according to Judaism. But it's just, I mean, all right, well, we could spend all episode debating religion here, and as fun as that would be, it's not really what I had in mind for all this show. I mean, the first half, yes, definitely. But let's talk about some Judaism and paranormal, because, I mean, come on. The paranormal field is full of movies and of everything else that has to do with Jewish horrors, such as, let's start off with one of my favorites, the tulpa, or golems, as they're more commonly called, because, like, what would make the Jewish want to make up this monster that could be created by the mind, like a tulpa? Like, I don't see how that could. Why would you want to create that? But yeah, it's in the Jewish faith this came to be. It wasn't a Christian faith thing. It was purely a Jewish faith thing. And I mean, we've all seen the X-Files episode with it. But I mean, like, how'd that come to be, like, in Jewish faith?
All right. So the short story is in Jewish metaphysics, I guess you could say Kabbalah, the Aleph Bet, the letters of the Aleph Bet, and our combinations, they're the source code of the universe. And so if you are a Kabbalist and you have sufficient spiritual mastery and sufficient spiritual merit, and also sufficient mastery of the name, like various names of God and various permutations of the Aleph Bet and so on, you are able to use the source code of the universe to weave together a golem, like a physical thing. You can't weave together a full soul, a full human being. And that's why the golem is kind of an automaton, because it doesn't have like a full soul, but it has, like, you can weave together an image of a man, a likeness of a man. So that's kind of what it is people using the Aleph Bet and the source code of the universe to create physical beings for practical purposes, or I have heard, stories about rabbis sending each other a golem, like, as almost a kind of prank, right? Just like, but also I have heard, like, it doesn't have to be a human. Like, I have heard that rabbis, like a couple of rabbis, every Shabbat, they would create a calf golem, and then slaughter the calf and have the calf for Shabbat. And so that came up because in Jewish law, they were wondering if, like, golems were kosher and so on. So so golems are quite interesting, but you can think of them like, the source code of the universe being rewritten to create, an entity.
Which, I mean, is kind of scary if you can create an entity out of anything you want to create out of. I mean, that could explain a lot of paranormal phenomenon if that's what's happening. I mean, yes, Bigfoot and dogmen seem to be too widespread to be golems, but it could explain the Loveland Frogman. It could explain the Lizard Man of Skateboard Swamp. It could explain a lot of other creatures that were like one-offs, like the Dover Demon. Even I mean, even though that seems more extraterrestrial in nature, it could explain a lot of things that like just can't be explained by paranormal researchers because it's just a one-off. It's not like they're seen all over the world or all over the United States, even like or Canada. It's just a one-off experience that people can't explain. So, I mean, and though it would be cool to create like an animal just to kill it, just to have meat. Like that would save a lot of money in today's world. But I mean, hell, I'd be making a freaking pig every couple weeks just to have all the bacon I want to eat. That's me personally. But I mean, it makes sense. But rabbis pranking each other, I gotta freaking love that. I gotta freaking love that theory.
Yeah, yeah, it's cool. Like, um, and like some of the stories, some of the paranormal stories that I hear from rabbis and through rabbis is very interesting. Like, um, for example, ghosts and demons, right? In the Jewish worldview, demons are computer programs with a certain, task, usually just to cause mayhem, etc. And so when I hear about rabbis going in to talk to demons and rabbis doing exorcisms, they aren't walking in with the holy water and chanting about, archangels and so on. They're walking in and pulling up a chair and sitting down and be like, okay, like, what's going on? Like, why are you here? Right? They just have a conversation with the demon, with the ghost, etc. And interestingly, like the Jewish view on demons and so on is kind of, if you don't worry about them, they won't worry about you.
Which makes sense in a way.
Yeah, because technically there's demons floating around and so on, but the invisible ambient demons, I guess you could say, they like the sages teach that they have blindfolds on, and basically whenever God wants to allow something bad to happen to someone, one of those nearby ambient demons gets to remove its blindfold, look at the person, they trip over the sidewalk or something, and then the demon puts its blindfold back on. So,
I mean, it kind of makes sense in a way, almost like because demons won't bother you unless you're looking for to be bothered. Like negative thoughts bring about negative things. Like that's kind of the lesson here, and it makes sense in a way. I mean, because I mean, to Christians, I mean, it's just demons can get you no matter what. Even if you're the best person on earth, a demon can possess you. Like, and yes, there are thousands of exorcisms every year by Christian Catholic priests, and it's just, I mean, yes, a lot of them are mental health cases more than they are actually demonic possession, but it's just, I don't know. I really don't know what to think about demons because I've also heard people say that demons are extraterrestrials. So,
yeah, and the interesting thing is, like, demons, I guess you could say technically they are extraterrestrials because they exist in spiritual realms. And also, if people want to see the Jewish take on that stuff, they could look at Rabbi Yaron Reuven's Gehenna. It's a 3-hour horror documentary, and he cites all of his sources, and he has actual paranormal footage of ghosts and demons and stuff. And it can be scary once, like when you dive into it, I suppose. But when you realize, kind of as you said, that it's if someone is being afflicted with a demon, there's usually a reason. They usually did something to bring it upon themselves. Like in physics, we say action, reaction. In Judaism, they say measure for measure. And that's kind of how the universe operates. And I think people intuitively understand, like, if you are, engaging in like demonic provocations and doing such and such, yeah, you might have, random unpleasant stuff happen to you. Like,
which makes sense in a way. But but yet the Jewish believe in the dybbuk, which is a whole another phenomenon that's similar to demons and ghosts, but I mean, it's kind of different. I mean, a dybbuk box is a very scary thing from what I've been told in the Jewish faith.
Yeah. And like, so dybbuks are basically a soul getting grafted onto, like a living human being, and you have like an extra soul. Like, I guess you could think of like if I suddenly grew a second head out of my shoulder, and this head was also talking, and we were arguing back and forth with each other, like, like a good Dungeons and Dragons campaign, like a two-headed giant. So if that happened, that's kind of like a dybbuk. Like, that would be a physical representation of what it's like. You basically get another soul that's like, on your back, sometimes taking control and so on. I very speculatively may have experienced one, but yeah, it's like I also discovered as part of my research and so on that I was a reincarnation. But the way that Jewish metaphysics has a cyclical aspect to it, in the sense that creation started, and you can get respawned back in to perfect certain things, right? But there's also an end point, which is Gog Magog and the end times and so on. So you can get cycled back in, and that is the case for reincarnations, but that's also the case for dybbuks. So what happens with those things is, if you are so wicked that you surpass even Gehenna, you go to a place that is worse than Gehenna, that is called Kafakela, and that translates to cup of the slingshot. And basically what happens in Kafakela is so unpleasant that some souls manage to escape, and they drop back into the universe and get sucked onto an existing soul for a time until they're exorcised and so on. And then they go back to Kafakela. And then after Kafakela, they go to Gehenna. So that's how those types of things happen, is you get this cyclical aspect of the universe. And so certain things are coming back in. There, kind of what I said with full system physics, there's ongoing transactions between our universe and the spiritual realms. And that's where you get ghosts. That's where you get dybbuks and possessions. That's where you get all of these phenomena. They are energy, souls, things cycling back in, but all for the purpose of rectification. That's what people have to keep in mind from the Jewish point of view. Everything has a rectification associated with it. So if it is the case that I experienced, a bit of a soul grafting, it was for a very specific reason, because I was doing scholarly work that was related to, I guess you could say, this person's genre. So they might, very speculatively, they might have come back for a few months to iron out the scholarship, and then they left. But it was unpleasant.
You keep saying that one word. I think it's Gehenna. I've never heard that.
Gehenna?
I've never heard that word in my life. What the heck is that?
Oh, okay. That's the Jewish word for hell. So Gehenna Gehenna is hell. And people are wondering what's Jewish hell. It's pretty much what you think it is, except it's for the purpose of cleansing the soul. So some people you can get up to heaven. Let's say you got a C-, right? Maybe you can go to hell for a certain amount of time, and that scrubs and burns away some of the dirt on your soul and so on, and you can get promoted to a C+. So for some people, Gehenna is temporary. For some belligerent people, a bit longer. But
I mean, so in the Jewish faith, you're not staying in hell forever, no matter what.
Yeah, even I think there are some people who are so wicked that they have to be punished eternally. Otherwise, everyone else would be dissatisfied. Because part of the problem with heaven and the Jewish world to come is, if you were so wicked that everyone in the world will be unhappy that you're there, if you ruin the vibe of the party, like, and it was free will decisions. Like people decide, like some people, I guess the prototypical example would be Hitler, right?
I was gonna say that, but I didn't want to fucking get like have you make you turn off your camera and leave and shit. But
well, like he like, or Stalin or Mao or Genghis Khan or like
I kind of respect Genghis Khan. I gotta say, I kind of respect him, but
well, he like super sigma. But like the thing with Genghis Khan, like let's use Genghis Khan as an example, right? Because he's got a huge body count and he's hundreds of years away, so it's a bit more easy to be neutral. If like let's say that they did some math and decided that Genghis Khan needed to be in hell for 1,000 years for all the murder and rape and whatever. 1,000 years is a long time, but in the time span of infinity, it's a blink of an eye. It's just a longer blink of an eye, and that's why I use physics to do this stuff, because we work with limits as things approach infinity. And so basically what you have is a lifetime, which is a blink of an eye. And then if you grew up, you have maybe a couple months, year, maybe 1,000 years of corrective action afterwards, which is spiritual washing machine. And then like, because even like in theory, if Genghis Khan kind of strolled into heaven and was like, hey folks, like, sorry, right? You have to remember, from the perspective of our souls in heaven, this is a video game. And so if you were to kill me in battle and I were to hold a grudge about that, that would be like me holding a grudge over a game of Halo for like a week, right?
I've done that.
And like, yeah, you would for a while, and that's probably the Gehenna part, right? Because there's, they have to be punished fairly. But then afterwards, it's like, man, remember that time we were in Passchendaele and you like, that was a good shot. Like you're like, everything was muddy. I don't know how you handled the gun. Like good times, right? So I think that's how we're going to experience things. And it helps put perspective on our earthly troubles as well. When you think about it as reflecting on a lifetime in a video game, for example.
Exactly. I mean, it's just eventually you're going to get a reboot. So, I mean, you're going to respawn eventually. So, it's not the end. It's not the end of the world per se. But all right, there was in my research for this episode, because I did do some research for this episode at one point. I came across a entity I never heard of until I researched it more, and that was the Eber. If I'm saying it correctly. Ibbur is how it's spelled. I could be pronouncing it horribly wrong.
Yes, I'm just pulling it up now. I've heard of it before, and I'm just refreshing.
Basically, it's what traditional ghost stories are based on in the Jewish mythology, from what I've researched. But I never heard of the name. I never heard of it. I mean, of course, I've heard of a dybbuk, and of course, I've heard of a golem, but I never heard of the Eber, and which kind of struck me as odd. I never would hear this name before for a ghost, especially in the paranormal world.
It's very interesting that you mentioned this, because I was just part of a spiritual sharing circle yesterday with Spiritual Awakenings International, and someone there talked about basically, like, they didn't name it. They were very hesitant because they've obviously been judged harshly, but it seems like a famous person from past generations or whatever is visiting them and giving them information and so on. And this sounds like an Ibur. So if folks look at Ibur on Wikipedia, this, like, the Wikipedia description, I think is sufficient. It's a soul that isn't evil, a soul that isn't trying to escape Kafakela. Like, if you're a wicked soul trying to escape Kafakela, that's a dybbuk. But an Ibur would be somebody from Gan Eden, someone from heaven, who drops down to fulfill a certain purpose. So that makes sense. And it says in Wikipedia that it usually happens with the consent and knowledge of the person. And that makes sense. Like, someone again, like if you think of our 6,000-year trajectory as a linear but also cyclical process of rectification, you might need somebody from heaven to come down for a little bit to rectify something, pop back out. So,
which I mean, it makes sense because not all ghosts are bad. There's good ghosts and there's bad ghosts. So I mean, evil ghosts and good natured ghosts, I should say, is more the word. But so I mean, because I mean, I've been told by mediums and psychics like crazy that I live basically with spirits around me all the time. I don't know what their purpose is. Nothing bad's happened to me. Well, that's not true, but nothing bad's happened to me like immediately. So I mean, it's not like they're here to haunt me. It's like they're here to keep an eye over me, I guess would be the best way to put it. So I guess they'd be Ebors. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it makes sense that there'd be good and there'd be bad in the spirit world always, but I don't know. It's just, I never heard that terminology till like a couple days ago when I was researching for this episode. So I was just like, huh, that's interesting. I never heard I mean, well, then again, I never had a Judaism expert on here to talk about this type of stuff. So it makes sense I wouldn't have heard about it in a way as well. But you think in somewhere in my paranormal crossings I would have came across, but I guess not. So I guess the final question I'll ask, which usually this is the second question I ask everybody, but I kind of left it to the end for you, just for reasons. What paranormal experiences have you had personally?
So for me, after 2 years, like between 2016 2018, I was doing a lot of research, and so the thing that kickstarted it was the 2-day spiritual experience, which included some synchronicities. And if people want to walk in my footsteps, they can read Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson, Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes, and the Bible in synchronicity. And that's what triggered, on top of a whole bunch of developmental psychology research. So I had a 2-day spiritual experience that was like, if people describing religious experiences and so on, like that's kind of what I experienced. However, basically between 2019 and 2023, I was dealing with like a lot of life stresses and so on, like, plus the pandemic, etc. And so I was in this almost this whirlwind of, doing scholarship, researching, and so on. And I've written, my books and papers are basically open source, and I cite everything. I try to be rigorous and impartial and so on. But this is the thing that I've experienced. And people, like, I don't really talk about this publicly. This is the first time I've really talked about it publicly, because it's like, people. Okay, so I'm going to give you some data points, and the data points I think are going to lead to an obvious conclusion, and then I'll give the conclusion. Okay, so my opus work, my theory of everything, which addresses psychology, neuroscience, all sorts of things, and Orthodox Judaism, is called Ticket to Heaven. It's free on my website, but look at the subtitle: The Unity of Knowledge, the Destruction of Idols, the Reclamation of Western Thought, the Realization of the American Dream, the Final Answer to the Jewish Question, and Utopia. Who would have come back to write about the unity of knowledge and the destruction? And the very first thing I decided to put in the book is the parable of the madman, where I talk about God being alive. And then I look at my biography, and I've got a whole bunch of biographical points that match. And then I look at the biographies of people around me. One of the people that taught me music is a music producer from Hamilton named Bob Deutsch. He worked with someone who was 20 years his junior, a female. Okay. And then he's also friends and so on with a famous music producer named Daniel Lanois, who is famous for various things. If I am Nietzsche, Bob Deutsch becomes Richard Wagner. His collaborator, Amy King, becomes Cosima Wagner. Daniel Lanois becomes Franz Liszt. who is also a prodigy in music, and it all lines up. So it's me, a cluster of people, and like 8 or 10 other people, and there's 3 lookalikes. The people in my life that should correspond to certain figures in Imperial Germany do, and they look alike. So since I caught on to the joke in September, I've been releasing works like Long Live Physics, A Commentary for All and None, and Philosophizing with a Laser. And I'm currently working on a new paradigm in the joyful science. And I've also been doing work on the physics of the Übermensch. So basically, it seems to me that I may be the reincarnation of Friedrich Nietzsche, and I'm back at it again, doing similar things: human nature, optimization, growth, metaphysics, value systems, right? That's all the stuff I talk about in my work. And physics, like he talked about long live physics and so on. So I got to come back, be an engineering physicist, do a whole bunch of this stuff. And so it seems to me like I'm the reincarnation of Nietzsche, which you would think is cool, but on some level it's stressful because it's like he put up some big numbers. And if I am the person that respawned, right, it's like, I've got some work to do. So yeah, that's what I've experienced, is basically an overwhelming amount of correspondence in my life, including biographical details, that indicates that I'm the respawn of Nietzsche. And it's just profoundly weird. But, it's a good meme. It's a good meme.
Well, damn. That's all I can say is damn. Talking to an actual reincarnation who actually recognizes what they are. That's beyond interesting. For a minute, I almost thought you were going to say you were reincarnation of Jesus. And I was going to be like, wait a minute. I was going to be like, I got some explaining to do. But, that makes, it kind of makes sense in a way. I would have to look into Nietzsche. Goddamn, I can't even say his name right. I'd have to look into it more to really see all the points there, but I don't think I ever dug too deep into who he was. I know the name, and I know what he did, but I just never really dug into him. But
I was the same way. Like for Ticket to Heaven, I pulled out some like the Übermensch, and I did some work, talked about idolatry and stuff. But Nietzsche, like I was never a Nietzsche fan growing up or anything. And the Parable of the Madman, revisiting that was just me doing something a couple of years ago, just as a writing exercise for fun. So it all just kind of added up and fell into place. And it is kind of like a cosmic joke. I think you could say that I was meant to find out at a certain point in time. And this just happened to be the pathway that I caught on to the joke.
Fate happens for reasons. There's fate. There's synchronicities exist for reasons. We love synchronicities in this show. It happens all the time. I was doing an interview the other day with a starseed, and a lot of synchronicities came up about me talking to her because she mentioned a certain extraterrestrial species called the Etruscans, which I just released an episode this past Saturday with the first person that ever taught me about Etruscans. And Etruscans, I should say Etruscans. And there's also I just edited another episode that was my first ever starseed that came on my other show first as my second time talking to her. So a lot of synchronicities have been happening lately, and it might do with the eclipse. I don't freaking know, but there's been a lot of synchronicities happening. But we could keep this conversation going for hours. We really could, but I do have family matters to attend to. So tell us, Zach, where can people find you? Where can they find your research? Where can they find if they want to learn more about the great man you are? Where can they find it all?
So my current, like in this life, my website is zacharystrong.net. You can also, if you Google or YouTube Zachary RJ Strong, you can find my YouTube channel. I've got full videos now on Genesis, Exodus, a whole bunch of stuff related to physics. I'm going to be releasing a video soon on near-death experiences and, phenomena there. And I try to keep all my stuff free. I suppose you could say one of my archetypes is Volk philosopher. I don't really care about the ivory tower or academia, so I try to keep everything as free and open source as possible for the people. Um, one thing I should probably end up by saying related to that is one thing that heaven loves the most is the common person. Heaven loves the common person. Heaven's in it for the rooting for the underdog and so on. So, I try to do the same with my work. So, yeah. If people want a theory of everything, Ticket to Heaven, 1,000 references. So it's all there. But yeah, thanks for having me on. It's cool to talk about this kind of stuff. It's cool that people are interested in things beyond the world of peer review, so
exactly. I mean,
great.
I mean, we literally have 16 watchers right now because people love to hear about this stuff. It's something outside of the world that we all can see. We want to know what's out there that we can't see, that we can't sense right away without us looking into it. That's what people love about this. And it's also knowledge. It's education about things we don't know about, which is the great thing for everybody should be doing this type of stuff rather than don't watch the Kardashians. I mean, yeah, it's Sunday night. Watch WrestleMania if you want. I don't care. But I mean, there's other things out there that are more educational and that are more informative that you should be watching and listening to. But hopefully this podcast is one of them. But I mean, we have fun in this podcast from time to time too, and it's not just all education. It's fun. But as far as, and yes, I do want to thank you for coming on, Zach, because this has been enlightening. I love episodes where I learn things, and I learned a lot in this episode. So those are my favorites, always. Nothing against any of my other guests where I don't learn things. It's always a fun conversation in this show. But for all my listeners and watchers, you know where you can find me by now. If you don't, what's wrong with you? The outro has been existing for like freaking 6 months to a year at this point. You can see where I'm streaming if you're watching, so you know where I am. If you don't, go back. There's like 200 episodes. Check them all out. They're all amazing. I don't think I've ever had a bad episode, really. And I will thank Zach one last final time for coming on because it's been enlightening. And of course, everything about him will be in the description of the podcast, so you guys can just click and go and check it out, of course. And till next time, folks, I got plenty of fun stuff for you this week, so come check it out. Have a good night, everybody.
See ya.
You can find me on Facebook as Jeremy Bryant, or you can find me as Uncensored, Unapologetic, and Untamed UQ Podcast Collective Facebook group. You can find me on Twitter and the Instagram as @JuggaloBastard, or should I say X now. And you can find me on TikTok as @JuggaloBastard Podcast. You can also find me on YouTube as Paranormal The New Normal. And you can also find me streaming on YouTube as Blind Knowledge Network, because all knowledge is blind until they admit Bigfoot exists.